Welcome to the week 3 go-to session. So this is the third session of 4 that we're holding. It's also been a week, right, since I last spoke to you guys. So welcome back. I hope that you found the lecture from last month that I uploaded and sent out was useful. Again, it covers exactly the same information. So planning sheets, which you handed in on Sunday, I'm grading tonight and tomorrow. Okay, so look for some feedback during that time. I think I explained this in the lecture video that I uploaded from last month, but I mostly grade on effort. So there were specific prompts on the assignment sheet that you had to answer, giving special attention to the second prompt, because that's where I wanted to see somewhat in detail your actual plan for the presentation. Remember, we're trying to break bad habits. So one bad habit is just winging it when it comes to the presentation, just sitting down and, okay, I have to create a presentation, so let me just open some slides and choose a template and slap some things on there and call it a presentation. No, I'd like to see some strategy. So this is designed to get you to have an actual strategy in place that you can at least somewhat follow when you sit down to create your presentation. But yes, I do realize that, for instance, even though I've been talking about the presentation every week, indicating what it's about, even though the assignment sheet, you had the actual final presentation assignment sheet to look at, so you could complete the planning document, and that contained the specific details of the presentation. Yeah, I realize that, not everybody's maybe 100% sure about what am I supposed to include, how am I going to present this information. So I'm really mostly grading on effort. So I'll give you specific feedback on the direction of your plan, make some suggestions. Okay. So let's get into week 3. And actually, some of this information probably maybe I should rearrange, because we're going to talk about specific techniques, things you can use in your presentation to make it feel less like a data dump and more like a natural presentation with a clear beginning, middle, and end. So yeah, maybe this could have been before the planning document. Let's see. Do I want to begin with the presentation? Actually, let me begin with the actual activities for this week, because that's probably the most important stuff. So if things crash, at least we've gone over that. Okay, so there are 2 activities for this week graded. Okay. We're in week 3. So actually, I'm confused. Yeah, there's 1 activity for this week. There's no discussion. No, at least no graded discussion for this week. Okay, so this is kind of, an easier week. You have 1 thing to work on, which is the actual draft of your presentation. Okay, so now that you've planned for it, and you'll get feedback from me on your plan, now it's time to put the presentation together. I have the instruction sheet open already, so let me go there. That's not what I need. Here we go. Oh no, that's the planning and presentation. How about we open the right things? That's from last week. Here we go. Okay, so if we open up the instruction sheet, it's going to look remarkably similar to what you already saw for last week, right? It's the actual instructions for the presentation that we're working toward. I hope people didn't get confused between the 2 sets of instructions for the planning activity. Remember, I cautioned in the video and in an announcement that sometimes students confuse the 2 sets of instructions. One is simply this document here, because in order to plan your presentation, you sort of have to know what the presentation is that you're planning toward. So I won't go over this too deeply, because I think I looked at this in the lecture video for last week, but you have some thought questions here. Okay, these are questions really designed for you to sort of consider. They may not end up in your actual presentation. Remember, your presentation is, here's the instructions, a 3 to 4 minute presentation aimed at prospective employers. You're a recent graduate of Full Sail, so you're projecting yourself 2 years into the future, right? Employers generally want to know what you've done. So when you project yourself in the future, you can actually draw upon concrete things that you expect to complete over the next 2 years. Yeah, so that means a little bit of research might be required. You might look into what you'll do over the next 2 years. You might look at certain facts about your industry, because then you can pull from those details and put them in your presentation. Because, yeah, we have some Full Sail students who are remarkably experienced, but we get a lot who they're learning everything here. So obviously you're not going to have much to say maybe at this stage in your education. But if you project yourself 2 years in the future, you should have things that you can mention, specific software that you've learned, specific skills, right, that you've learned here at Full Sail. Maybe you work on some sort of final project. So if you're a computer animation student, maybe you'll create a short animated film, right? You can certainly mention that. in your presentation. As you know, during my time at Full Sail, as a final project, I created this short 15-minute animation. Give it a title, maybe even describe it very briefly. But yeah, you get to semi-invent certain details. And I believe I said this in the previous video, but don't go crazy, okay? If you're a creative writing student, don't say that you've written a best-selling novel. If you're a film student, don't say that you've directed a Hollywood blockbuster. Okay, the details should be realistic, but you can certainly project as you are asked to do, and mention things that you'll realistically have accomplished or learned. Where was I? Oh yeah, these thought questions. So these are mostly for use. For example, what is your target industry? Let's say it's computer animation. Okay, good. That's probably definitely going to appear in your presentation. Let's see, what's a good one here? In your particular industry, what forms of presentation, visual and oral, are effective? Obviously, this is a question for you to consider. So when you think about it, remember, audience is king. This question is really asking you to consider what sort of moves will you make in your presentation that will appeal to your specific industry, okay? Because you're going to be speaking to a prospective employer from that industry. But obviously, you're not literally going to answer this in your presentation. I want to stress this pretty hard because sometimes I do see presentations where slide 1 is answering this question, slide 2 is answering this question. No, your task is to develop just a 3 to 4 minute presentation. And I also believe in the lecture video that I sent out from last week, I talked a bit about branding, right? This isn't branding in the sense that, you have to come up with your own company or your own logo. No. Branding is just a fancy way of saying your unified sense of who you are. All people should be aware of how they come across, okay? And certain people in the public eye are hyper aware of how they want to come across. You should too. So your brand is simply a fancy way of saying, yes, a 3 to 4 minute presentation that presents you as a thoughtful, knowledgeable, experienced professional. If you can do that in 3 to 4 minutes, yes, you've established your quote unquote brand. Let's see, what else is here? You get some notes on what you should probably include, okay? What makes you unique, what knowledge and skills have you mastered, etc. Okay. I think I said earlier, probably in week 1, that these assignments are all flexible, and that's by design. So, by the way, I have like a nice sort of mini essay that I copy and paste to every student when I respond to the planning document. Obviously, I craft specific comments for your planning document as well. But I have a nice, nifty little kind of summary package that sort of takes what we've learned so far and summarizes it. Anyway, in those sets of comments, I talk a bit about, your task is you can fill that 3 to 4 minutes with, certainly there will be core information that you should probably definitely include. Again, those skills, experiences, education, right? Mentioning that you are a recent graduate of Full Sail. But other than that, you can include anything you want as long as it's appropriate for your audience, as long as it fits the needs of what you think would be realistic for a 3 to 4 minute presentation aimed at prospective employers. So maybe you'll comment on your industry as a whole. Maybe you'll comment on what you value in your field, right? So if you're a video game student, okay, video game design, maybe you have specific thoughts about the industry or where you fit in the industry or where you see the industry heading. You can certainly talk about these things, okay? And when I give feedback on your drafts, I'll mention if I think you're wandering too far off topic, or if information seems too personal, or if information doesn't seem audience appropriate. So I'll certainly help, okay? But yeah, you have a lot of flexibility here. Okay. I'll let you go through the rest of this on your own. Again, this isn't the first time that you've seen this sheet. I'll just say that for the draft, which is due Sunday, you should have a presentation in the best shape possible. Okay. Remember, these presentations include both the visual component, so your slides or whatever you want to call, you might not use PowerPoint, but whatever is the equivalent of slides if you're using video editing software or whatever. And it includes your professionally scripted voiceover. That's the actual content, right? What you have to say. So yeah, try to have both pieces in place. At the very least, maybe you have the slides in place and they're pretty solid. And if you didn't have time to record the voiceover, you at least give me a script. Or if you're using something like PowerPoint, there's that notes function, so you can at least put below each image what you plan to say. In other words, the more you give me, the more I can work with. So the more it's a functioning draft, the more I can respond to it. Again, that's pretty much what the grade is going to be for. So if you give me very little, like 4 hastily put together slides with not much content, or they're not following course concepts, remember all month we've been talking about a visual first strategy. It's not that text is bad, but we're not just taking the content and slapping it all on slides. So yeah, if it's not following course concepts, or if the visuals are okay, but there's only 3 or 4 of them, and then I have no script, no sense of what you're actually going to say, that's going to probably affect your grade because I don't have as much to respond to. Does this make sense, everyone? In essence, I'm saying have the draft in as strong shape as you can for Sunday. The further along you are, of course, then the less work you'll have to do for the final version, which is due at the end of the month. But it is a draft, so I understand. I mean, if it's not perfect, or if something's not entirely complete, that's okay. But again, try to give me something that gives me a clear sense of the overall presentation. I'll also be sending out this week samples of past student presentations. Those should be very helpful because even though I talk about this assignment a lot and give lectures over it, sometimes for students it really starts to click once they see past examples. So I have some examples of pretty snazzy, fancy looking presentations made using video editing software, but I also have one that's kind of a little bit old school. It's PowerPoint. The woman who created that presentation probably didn't feel super comfortable with technology, but the presentation is still following course concepts. It's still professionally put together. And yeah, by the way, all the examples I'll be giving, I'll send them out as an announcement, are examples of A-level presentations, sometimes low A's. But yeah, they're all examples of good presentations. And I also have notes that I include with it, just really brief things about what's working well in each presentation and what could be improved. So you also get a sense of, yeah, what I'm kind of looking for. But yeah, looking at the examples, as Bethany says, they help students. Because I've seen students sometimes struggle, but once they see the finished project, they sort of reverse engineer. Everything starts to make sense. Everything I've been saying verbally all month makes sense once they see examples of it. Okay, so that's coming. Any questions at this stage over the draft that's going to be due Sunday? And then week 4, we'll spend some time doing peer review. So you'll post your presentations on the discussion board, which is pretty cool because everybody gets to see one another's work. And you'll comment to at least 2 of your classmates about what could be improved, right? What's working well, what could be improved. Adrian says, part of me doesn't want to look at the examples. Yeah, I can understand that. And by the way, I do have a caution that I always include. Nobody should be copying directly the presentations, either in terms of specific wording or structure. I mean, yes, in general, it's fine that there's some similarity. So if one person mentions specific skills acquired, you're certainly allowed to do that too. But I mean like the specific structure, right? So a student mentions, I don't know, starts off with an anecdote from childhood. This is when I fell in love with video games, or this is when I first picked up guitar. And then another student starts out the exact same way or something. Yeah, so use these as inspiration, okay? Don't copy exactly. But yeah, feel free, Adrian, to ignore the samples if you want. Okay, where should I go now? How about the presentation itself? Why don't we get on track? Okay, so far we haven't crashed. That's a good sign. A little bit nervous to put this in full screen mode. Okay, so welcome to week 3. I love this image. Take a look, people. This is sort of what we're going for. Remember in week 1, I took a quote about education. Something about education is the kindling of a flame, not the filling of a vessel, or something like that. And then I showed how just plain text on the screen doesn't do very much. But if you pair it with the right image, it does. So here, yeah, as Maxwell says, that's quite an impact. Right. content, your content in your 3 to 4 minute presentation. That's the space you have to make an impression on your audience, potential employers, right? You're trying to make an impact. So yeah, look, I went out and found what I thought was a really cool image of an impact crater and limited text, because this is all we need, right? I want to stress the importance of your content and how it needs to make an impact on your audience. So this, that's all I need, content, how to make an impact. And even though the font isn't fancy, it's visually striking, right? It pairs well with the image. I didn't just grab the first font that I saw, whatever the stock font was when you open up Keynote or PowerPoint. So yeah, these are the choices you'll make as well. Okay. Anyway, there's a slide that just reminds us what we're aiming for. Again, it's not that text can never be used, but I think it was in week 1. Remember, I showed you a brief image of someone's presentation from last month, and I showed how even when larger sections of text do appear, the goal is to somehow present it visually. Okay, so visual, think of that, visual, not just putting words on slides. We've talked about this all month. So do I need to say anything more about audience? We all understand that, right? Audience is not theoretical, it's actual. And again, I'll help with this. I'll let you know when I think you're including information that maybe your audience wouldn't need to know. So sometimes students start mentioning every course they've taken at Full Sail. I took creative presentation and learned such and such. I took English composition and learned such and such. And then I'll say gently, of course, because everybody's learning. Yeah, I'm not sure that if your industry is music production, that they need to know all that, right? So I'll help you make sure that your information is audience centered. Bethany says, what would potential employees be for someone in digital cinematography? That would be the only question this month. Okay, first of all, where do you see yourself heading? A filmmaker? Literally a cinematographer? I mean, the easy answer is, of course, someone in the film industry. You don't have to literally pick out a specific employer, Bethany. I mean, some students do, and that's okay. Sometimes they'll target a specific record label. That's fine, but you don't have to. So yeah, Bethany, you're speaking to people in the film industry in general. I should also say that I'm pretty flexible in terms of potential employer. For example, if it helps you think better in terms of like client, or you're just pitching your overall skills, knowledge in general, because obviously in the film industry, you're not typically going in for formal interviews, but you'll need to pitch yourself. You'll need to pitch screenplay ideas, story ideas. That's not this assignment. Everybody needs to stick to the format, but you can certainly be flexible in terms of if you don't specifically see yourself literally being hired by an employer, you can certainly imagine it being again, a client. You're offering your services, hoping that they'll hire you. So don't get too hung up on that, Bethany. She says, I'm working to be a YouTuber. It's difficult to figure out what real job I'd be looking for. Yeah, so Bethany, maybe it makes sense to imagine yourself pitching yourself to, for example, maybe there's someone out there whose skills, online skills, aren't very sharp, and maybe they would turn to you for creation of YouTube content. Or maybe there's someone who wants to get a film or a commercial or some sort of spot made, and they know that they want it to be on YouTube. I understand that if you're going to something very, very specific, like you want to work in some sort of alternative job world, okay? And I think being a YouTuber, which, by the way, I'm kind of out of touch, but I have a 12-year-old daughter, so I know something about that there are huge YouTube stars and Vine stars. I don't know anything about that, but I'm too old. But I'm aware that there are legitimate job opportunities, creative opportunities in other areas. But mostly stick to the assignment. Okay. So if you need to bend things a little bit, that's fine. Luis says, how about music production? I plan to make music for films, cartoons, etc. Again, Luis, the same thing. Maybe you want to kind of imagine yourself pitching to a client who would be looking to hire you to create a short film or music for cartoons, etc. Okay. And you know what? It won't really make that big of a difference, because whether you're the interviewee looking to be hired or you're pitching yourself to a client, it's really the same thing. No, someone's looking to take you on and use what you have to offer based on the 3 to 4 minutes that you sort of pitched yourself. So yeah, think about it that way. You're pitching yourself. And I think no matter what industry you're in, it will help. Audience awareness is more important in terms of, yeah, the specific content you'll include. So the examples I gave of either off-topic information, or your information is way too detailed and specific, or I've seen students define terms that don't need to be defined because their audience would already know that. I think I gave the example of the person who defined Sun Microsystems, mentioned what year the company started, and I forget what he was in, graphic design maybe. And I told him, yeah, your audience would know this already. They don't need to be lectured or be told those sorts of things. Jade says, what about entertainment business? Do I think about pitching a company? Yeah, Jade, the same thing. I know entertainment business is a big umbrella term. I mean, it might help you a little bit, and possibly me, if you kind of know what area of entertainment business you want to work in. If you see yourself being a manager, for instance, or a PR person. Yeah, I mean, I hate to sound like a broken record, but I think everybody can fit into at least imagining themselves pitching their services to someone, because that's what you're doing as a potential employee for a traditional company, right? You're trying to, as an applicant, present yourself as the best candidate to get the job. So even if you're not going for a traditional job where you're filling out W-2 forms, and I mean, yeah, you can still, I think, fulfill the assignment requirements. Okay, I'm gonna get back to the presentation. Telling stories. So we've talked about this. We've read about this. Yeah, your presentation as a whole even kind of stands as a story. You have 3 to 4 minutes to tell your story, not literally your life story, but your story about who you are, where you fit in the industry, what your specific skills, experiences are, etc. But also think about stories in the more immediate sense, okay? Because these presentations shouldn't just be data dumps, right? My name is, my degree is in, my skills are, my qualifications are, right? We need to sort of break up that information so it doesn't feel dull. One great way to do that is through storytelling. So yeah, I mean, think about, for instance, how are you going to begin your presentation? So again, the 3-act structure. Just about any creative work has a beginning, middle, and end, including your presentation. So how should you start? Maybe you'll share a short personal story. Maybe there was something, I don't know, you heard Michael Jackson's Thriller album at the age of 8, and that's when you realized you wanted to do, you wanted a career in music, right? Or you played Super Mario Brothers back in whatever year that was. And that's the day you fell in love with video games. It doesn't always have to be an origin story. I mean, maybe there's another anecdote. Maybe there's another story. Maybe there's a story you can pull from the headlines, or maybe someone who's already successful in your field. But just realize that telling stories, sharing anecdotes can be a powerful move, not just to open your presentation, but you can do it at any point in the presentation. Okay. And if you think about the TED Talks too, chances are probably a lot of your presenters told a brief story. Did anybody notice that in theirs? I posted, I think I shared the fact that I watched Susan Cain's TED Talk, and yeah, she tells stories in the beginning, at the end. So that's a possibility as well. You'll have to keep things short. You don't have a tremendous amount of time to work with. But yeah, sharing anecdotes is terrific. So we'll also talk about strategies for the middle, the end. By the way, here's a quick tip. Having the end mirror in some way the beginning is a nice way to sort of create this sort of bookend sort of thing where you're tying up loose ends, you're sort of finishing off that bow. So maybe you begin with an anecdote. Oops, didn't mean to click on it. Hold on, bear with me. Come on, come back. There we go. All this just for the beginning, middle, and end thing. Okay, so maybe you begin with a personal anecdote, and who knows, maybe you leave part of the story unfinished and you return to it at the end. Or maybe you begin with a thoughtful question. That's another nice technique, right? Generic questions, those don't work too well. And actually, as a warning, Be careful, because the different techniques and moves I'm talking about in this session can be terrific moves when they're used naturally. When they're just forced into a presentation, then they can seem mechanical and forced. So, but beginning with a thoughtful question that you truly want your audience to consider, maybe it's something about your industry, maybe coming back and answering that question at the end is a technique. So yeah, having the beginning and end connect, communicate in some way is a nice trick. But let's talk about some others. Oh, did my voice go a little bit wacky there for a moment? I'm hearing people saying that in the chat. We talked about the star moment back in, oh gosh, week 2 or something, right? Something they'll always remember. Ideally, hopefully, there's a moment in your presentation that you're particularly proud of. Maybe it's a specific slide, maybe it's a specific series of slides, maybe it's a section of your spoken content that you think is truly amazing. And hopefully your audience should recognize it also. Okay, we call that the star moment. Just a little refresher about that. And there's a nice visual to accompany it. Okay, so again, this is sort of what we're going through for in our presentations. And by the way, look how simple that is, right? I mean, your job isn't, by the way, just to create a nice looking photo slideshow that acts as complete background decoration. No, your images should be doing work. Your images should be connecting with what you're saying. They shouldn't just be pretty decoration. But yeah, what I like about switching to this different version of creating presentations is it just feels more creative and fun. Okay. Find the right visual, combine it with the right text, and yeah, that's more powerful. Okay, I'm gonna fly through this a little bit. Okay, so how do we generate these moments that kind of stand out in your presentation? These something they'll always remember moments. The first one you probably won't use, memorable dramatization. That just is a fancy way of saying something that you act out. Okay. I think one of the readings gives the example of Bill Gates opening a jar of mosquitoes during a talk in order to get the audience awake and aware. And yeah, it engages them, but it also connects because he was giving a talk about, I believe, disease in Africa. So that's pretty powerful. Or Steve Jobs taking out the newest, I think it was the MacBook maybe, out of a manila envelope to show off how thin and light it was. Okay. So anything that you sort of act out is memorable dramatization. Students don't use this too much because obviously most students are behind the scenes. A couple times students feel comfortable enough to be on camera, but usually they're not. Repeatable sound bites. I'm going to give some examples of these in a moment. I kind of wish students would do this more often, but this is really being so hyper aware of what you say that even to the level of your wording, you're paying careful attention because you want that wording to stick. And I'll give some examples in a moment, so to make that more sense. We've been talking about evocative visuals all month. Okay. So some people were impressed with that impact crater image. Okay, good. That means it stood out. We've already talked about storytelling. Shocking statistics. Yeah, I should probably replace that with the word surprising. Yeah, remember in high school, maybe you learned from your English teacher that there are lots of ways to grab your reader's attention, to hook them. You probably learned about begin with a quotation, begin with a short personal anecdote, begin with a thoughtful question, begin with surprising or interesting facts. Okay, essentially all those apply to the presentation as well. And like I said, they're all terrific when they can be used naturally, but they're forced and mechanical if they're not used naturally. So, using a quotation isn't up here, but I already mentioned the quotation that we looked at in week 1 from Socrates, right? And paired it with 3 different visuals to show how the words change when paired with the right image. But yeah, if you're just quoting Shakespeare, just to quote Shakespeare, and it has no real connection with what you're saying, that's probably not going to get your audience very interested. Or gosh, what was it? Last month I had a woman quote Leo Tolstoy. Anybody know who Tolstoy? I mean, did I share this anecdote? I can't remember. Does anybody know who Leo Tolstoy was? He's a War and Peace. He's a 19th century Russian novelist. And I mean, I didn't know for sure, but I'm willing to bet my life she had no idea who Leo Tolstoy was. So why is she quoting him? Why? Because she probably went to a quotation website, picked out a quotation that sounded nice, and put it in her presentation. The impulse is right. Sometimes we can find the right quotation that helps create interest, vary the structure of presentation, so it's less just a simple presentation of endless facts. But yeah, you should be using the power of your own brain and thought to come up with a thoughtful question or a quotation or a personal anecdote or a surprising statistic. Okay. Um, yeah, it should come from the power of your own thought, because if you're just running out to grab something, probably you're not terribly interested in it, and your audience won't be either. But yeah, when used well, these can all be great techniques. Now there's audio here, but you can't hear it on your end. Just some examples of repeatable sound bites. This is Ronald Reagan. This would have been, gosh, I want to say 1989. I was alive at the time when the Berlin Wall came down. Okay. Don't want to turn this into a history lesson, but Germany used to be split in half. There's communist East Germany, democratic West Germany. And Reagan had this really memorable moment where he said, "Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall." Okay. So repeatable sound bites, they can either be sound bites that stick, and from politics, we have a lot of them. So whatever your feelings about either candidate, Donald Trump has "Make America Great Again." He played on that with "Make America Safe Again." If we go all the way back to the 1960s, there's John F. Kennedy. Ask not what your country can do for you. Ask, I always screw this up. Ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country. Right? Yeah, those are examples of phrases that are so well crafted that they stick, and they're meant to stick. That's why professional speechwriters get paid a lot of money to write these things. But I'm going to give another example of a repeatable soundbite that's probably closer to what you could possibly do in your presentation. Okay, let's skip this. We talked about visuals plenty all month. Oh, this is like week one. Just a repeat. Here's a quotation or a fact. Okay, presented on the page. It's fine, but it's bland. It's dull. But if we pair it with the right image, it gets transformed. Okay, so again, this is what we're aiming for. Oh, let me go back for 1 second. Please be building the slides in your presentation on your own. It's fine if you go out and find the right allowable image. Again, you should be going to Creative Commons type sources or the AP Images database. But yeah, you should be making it yourself in terms of you're finding the right image, you're choosing the text to put on the slide. I've been seeing this trend lately where students are going out onto the internet and finding slides that kind of look like this already. And sometimes they're from allowable sources. And I don't know, it feels like the slide has been done for you. I mean, think about it. If you find a powerful visual, that's awesome. I mean, someone's already done that for you. So yeah, take the time to at least copy the image in and choose text and choose a font and pair it with the image. Don't take things that are already pre-rendered. Storytelling we've already talked about, so I'm going to skip past that. Here's a good example of a surprising or shocking statistic. So this is from Steve Jobs, and my cursor has disappeared. Give me a second to move this out of the way so I can actually read. And I'm still being... There we go. We are selling over 5 million songs a day now. Isn't that unbelievable? 5 million songs a day. That's 58 songs every second of every minute of every hour of every day. So look at that last line specifically. Like, that's sort of the thing I would like to see happen more often in student presentations, an awareness of language to such a degree that you could actually craft a sentence like this. Because here it's intentional repetition, right? I hope maybe Steve Jobs wrote this himself, or maybe he got a little bit of help, but still, this is on purpose, okay? 58 songs every second, every minute, every hour, every day. Okay, the repetition of every. Even the order of things, so we go from a second up to a minute, up to an hour, up to a day. Yeah, that's clever. That sticks. You may not realize it as an audience member, but it grabs you. I mean, the fact itself is interesting. That's kind of the bigger point here, to use surprising or interesting statistics. But this is doing two things at once. It's using a surprising statistic, and it's also implementing a repeatable soundbite. Okay? Yeah, that really is amazing, though. 5 million songs a day. And this must have been several years ago, because now it's all streaming music, and I forget what I saw once. I think it might have been in a TED Talk, just the number of YouTube videos that are created and uploaded per day. It was something ridiculous. I'm sorry, I'm getting off topic. Okay, moving forward. Oh, I'm going to fly through this stuff. It's important, but I'm going to kind of breeze through it. If you've ever heard of these fancy Greek words before, ethos, pathos, logos, they're just fancy ways of saying pathos is the appeal to emotion. So if you ever seen those sad commercials that are always on late at night with the singer Sarah McLachlan, with all the sad dogs and cats in cages, and the commercial goes on forever, you try to get away from it, and you come back thinking it must be over now, and it's still going. Yeah, that's pathos working overtime. So they appeal to emotion. You're probably not going to be reaching out to your audience in such an emotional way, but realize that, yeah, if it's just a data dump, then you're doing logos, the appeal to logic, the appeal to facts. Okay, when you just list endless facts, you're using logos. So pathos is more the human side. So it doesn't mean that you have to make your audience cry, but it does mean, for example, if you share an interesting personal anecdote, that's more the human side of things. Ethos is a little bit more difficult to explain. It basically means the trust or credibility you create. It comes across in everything you do. So when I send out these sample student presentations, because they're all professionally done and they all, yeah, earn pretty good grades, Ethos is working in those presentations. Here's Ethos. You come away with a feeling that, wow, I trust this person. This person really knows his or her stuff. Right? The TED Talk presenters often have a strong sense of ethos. You finish the presentation, and whether you're crazy about it or not, you probably felt confident that that person was worth listening to, that that person knew what they were talking about. That's ethos. Okay, and ethos is kind of destroyed if you just wing it, if you just throw stuff on slides, or your voiceover isn't scripted. Okay. By the way, I think I've mentioned this before, but your voiceover should be scripted. Okay, work from a script so you can carefully record things. For the draft version, it's not a big deal if the voiceover isn't super perfect, but for the final version, yeah, it should be polished, professional, and you do that by actually writing out a script for it. Because if not, then it affects ethos. I mean, how much trust do you have in someone whose presentation looks sloppy, or the voiceover, or if they're speaking live, that what they have to say just comes across scattered, a mess, right? Someone who's unprepared. Anyway, here's some circles that show this stuff. Oh, wow. So many slides on ethos, pathos. I'm going to fly through this. Students never cared that much about this. So if I could just get people to remember pathos, right? Think of like pathetic, connects with emotion. Logos, the word logo sounds like logic that deals with facts, statistics. If I can get people to remember that much, I think I'm winning. So yeah, let me get past these slides. Just an obvious statement. We're going to be improving our work. So yes, I'd like to see you put forth the best effort possible for the draft, but you'll get feedback from me. You'll get feedback from your classmates. And you're going to use that feedback to revise and polish what you have, because yes, there's always room for improvement. I think most people know this, but just in case, I always repeat it. Yeah, it's sometimes amazing with schoolwork. People, we drag our heels to revise that essay or revise that presentation, but in things that we care about, that's sort of the norm, right? Songwriters just don't sit down, write something, and I'm done. I don't need to go back. Or paint something or film something, right? There's editing, there's going back, there's fixing, there's improving. Same thing with your presentations, okay? Yeah, and I have some quotes here. The audience learns a lot about you based solely on how you appear the first time. So in other words, what's that cliche? You never get a second opportunity to make a first impression, right? You've all heard these cliches. You probably roll your eyes at them. But yeah, they're true. There's a reason sometimes things turn into cliches, because there's some truth to them sometimes. And we know this from interviews, okay? Using common sense. You show up to an interview wearing your grease-stained sweats and a torn-up rock and roll t-shirt. probably not going to do very well in terms of getting the job. Same thing here. It's not that this presentation is the same as a resume and cover letter, but it has some similarities. Okay, this is your sort of one chance to present yourself as a thoughtful professional in 3 to 4 minutes. So yeah, it should be a powerful impression. Adrian says, are we sharing this only this Sunday's product or the plan we turned in 2.4? Yeah, if you're talking about peer review, only your draft that you'll complete this Sunday gets shared. You're not going to share your planning documents with one another. Okay. Yeah, I'm trying to think. Did I skip anything? Questions? Let's open up to that. So the main task is to work on that draft for Sunday. That's the only graded activity, I think, right? Yeah. So this week is designed on purpose to be a little bit freer because we know that you have to work on your presentation. So questions, comments about anything, not just this lecture, but maybe the class as a whole, or maybe something we've discussed previously, or anything that's forthcoming. I can answer it all. If you don't have questions, as usual, I'm not going to force you to stay here. You're allowed to go and enjoy the rest of your evening. Thanks for attending. I'm going to hang out for a little bit and answer questions. Adrian says, is this a canned version of the career modules? Is what a canned version of the career modules? The presentation itself? You know, the modules are so new to Full Sail that I'm not fully aware of them myself. Like, I just generally know that there are career modules, but because they don't impact directly the classes that I teach, which is both creative presentation and English. I'm not sure. If you want to, you can refresh me on what you know about the career modules. Or aren't they like checkpoints that you have to basically get through at certain stages? Right, they're connected to the portfolio. Louise says, how do I show the images I took that aren't from outside sources again? I'm not sure I completely understand that question. I mean, I understand how do you cite images. I got a little bit tripped over aren't from, I mean, they should always be from an allowable source, right? So there's the AP images section of the Full Sail Library database. That one's not as useful because the pictures aren't really very pretty or professional. They're just usually snapped by some reporter and used for news stories, although sometimes you can find good stuff in there. But I've always mentioned compfight.com. You can, by the way, you can use other Creative Commons type sources. You just have to provide me with the URL or something that takes me directly to the information about the image, because if not, yeah, I'll take points off because I need to make sure that everything is coming from an allowable image. Remember, I did that thing where in week 1, I said what I don't want to see is people just Googling, and I think I did a search for Taylor Swift. You have to get things from allowable sources. So here's compfight.com. So anything below the dotted line we can use. This guy's really cute right here. So let's say I wanted to use this photo. I can choose the size that I want and then drag it into my presentation. And the simplest way is just to go in here and find the URL. Most people know how to find a URL. They know what a URL looks like because we don't need all this HTML. And we know that it works because if we plug it in, it's going to take me right to the image. And then the image gives me the information I need to know. Some rights reserved. Okay, that means it's allowable. Some people for the TED Talk assignment did use things that were from compfight.com, but yeah, they gave me URLs or something that I could get to the image and see that it was. You basically need, it either needs to say some rights reserved or it needs some sort of statement that says, you know, these images are allowed to be used commercially or for educational purposes, right? Something that's giving permission for basically people to use the images mostly however they wish, as long as they give credit. And I know there are sites out there that don't even ask, that don't even say you have to give credit, but I still need the credit so I can check the image. But it's that simple. And yeah, you could probably do a search for Creative Commons images. Do we all know that term, by the way, Creative Commons? Creative Commons is simply, there's an actual Creative Commons website that explains the whole because there are lots of actual designations for photos, different levels of allowability. But in general, it's something that's been creative. It's a designation that's been created because in the world we live in today, yeah, it's a sharing world, right? We all use the internet, we all use social media, we all create things. We all have to create sometimes for our work presentations or brochures. And imagine if you had to create everything from scratch. You know, some of us aren't professional photographers, or we don't have the time to take photos. So yeah, there are a whole bunch of multimedia tools that are out there. Everything from sounds to images to even short video clips that are purposely meant to be shareable. Okay. Um, because yeah, it's pretty much required. But if you do a search for Creative Commons type sources, you can find other images. Oh, that should, you know what? I just remembered something. Let me go to Full Sail Connect. There's actually also a place you can go to for free music. So let me go to the library because it's really pretty awesome. I think I mentioned this before, but yeah, I don't want to hear Demi Lovato playing in your presentation or anybody, Michael Jackson. No copyrighted music can be used. Now, does it mean that Michael Jackson or his family is going to come after you? No, of course not. But it's just, yeah, we're teaching copyright respect. So, anyway, if you go to the research databases section of the library and you scroll down to West Star Music, this is a new machine, so I might have to enter in this information for the full time. Full Sail 1234. If you go in, Full Sail 1234, we'll save that password. You get all this music, and yeah, it's kind of generic music. I mean, it's written by real people. They're composer credits if you look for them. Um, but yeah, it's music that's designed to be used freely. Maybe you want to use it in a project, or maybe you want to use a sample from something in your own composition, and it's organized by types. So here we get American classics, folk and popular. Yeah, they kind of have corny titles, and it's not elevator music, but it's allowable background music. Okay, and then you can just download whatever you want. I believe it's an MP3 format. These tracks normally sell for between $50 and $60, I think, but you get it free as a Full Sail student. So if you need music, here's a lot of music. Sometimes, depending on the program you use, like video editing software, will often have some music tracks. I use iMovie. It comes with some various yeah, instrumental tracks you can use in the background. Louis says he's going to use a 30-second demo of one of my tracks in the presentation. Okay. Be sure that you put it probably at the end, like finish the presentation and then say something like, you know, I don't know, and here's a sample of my music, or enjoy this 30-second sample of my music. If it comes in the middle, it's going to feel like a long, long pause to sit there for 30 seconds. 30 seconds doesn't sound long, especially to you, the person who created the music. But for a general audience member, they'll be wondering, why am I sitting here for 30 seconds listening to the music? Okay. And that's 30 seconds beyond the normal 3 to 4 minutes for the presentation. Maxwell says, when we aim to make our first draft, how close to the final draft should we try to make it? Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, ideally, I'd say like 3/4 of the way there if you can. Um, I mean, again, give me as much as you can. So, yeah, there are times people don't get the voiceover recorded. But if I don't have any idea what's going to be spoken with the slides, that's kind of difficult. Or again, there are only 3 or 4 slides in place. Or, I mean, in other words, I know it's a great question, but it's sort of impossible to answer. That's why I say have it in the best form you can possibly make it. People should probably know at this point that I'm kind of an easy grader. I don't give gift grades. I don't just rubber stamp things with A's, but I'm not the most. I grade on effort. Let me put it that way. I grade on effort. So when I see your draft, I mostly ask myself, okay, does this seem reasonable for a draft? And yeah, I can't quite define what that is, but it should be functional. I'd much rather see something that's working, something that's giving me a full sense of the presentation, even if it's in rough format, rather than something that maybe has gorgeous visuals, but I have no script accompanying it. No idea what's going to accompany those images. So maybe that makes sense. Let's see. Louis says, for the presentation, we need to send our script for our presentation as well. Yes, if you don't have the voiceover recorded. If the voiceover is in place, then I can just listen to it. But yeah, a script is definitely needed if you don't have the voiceover recorded. Remember, for the final presentation, it's going to be a working presentation. So visuals and voiceover combined, so I can just sit back and click play on a PowerPoint or click play on your MP4 file, your video file, and watch the presentation. And by the way, this week, the discussion board, usually students discuss these technical issues, and I have some advice to give too for people who aren't sure how to record, specifically through PowerPoint. So I'll post something to the discussion giving those tips. I mean, real simply, for people who are very uncomfortable with technology, it's as simple as you can record slide by slide. And that's okay, because I don't really mind very much. I should be able to put the recording for each slide together so it sounds like a cohesive whole in my mind. But yeah, if I have to listen to it slide by slide, that's okay. Bethany says, I'm not sure how professional I should make my script sound. Speaking professionally sounds forced to me. Yeah, I mean, when I say professional, maybe neutral is a good way to put it. In other words, you shouldn't be so informal that it sounds like you're just talking to a friend. But you certainly don't have to sound stilted. You don't have to sound like you know how politicians talk, or lawyers, or people think they are really fancy and they use lots of big words, and they use 10 words when only 5 are needed. Okay, you certainly don't have to filibuster or pad or sound sophisticated. So I don't mean professional in that sense. There's a way to come across professionally and just sound kind of, middle of the road, kind of neutral, down to earth. Okay, but not too down to earth. Agent says a good idea of how to work with PowerPoint would be appreciated. I'm working on mine. Okay, yeah, I have some tips on that. Yeah, it's not so difficult at all. Nelson says, will iMovie be accepted as well? Yeah, absolutely. I love iMovie. And I think I've said this before. I use iMovie kind of in place of presentation software, because you don't have to drag in video files. You can drag in images and use all those powerful tools that iMovie has. It also has a pretty good recording tool built into it. Very natural. Yeah, it's actually, I love working with iMovie. So if people want to take a chance, yeah, video editing software is a good technique. Sometimes when you see these really snazzy looking presentations, I'll include some in the student examples. They're usually made using video editing software, which is not difficult at all. If you can click around in PowerPoint and mostly figure out what to do, you can use video editing software. It's usually just as user friendly. But yeah, choose a tool that you're most comfortable with. Any other final questions before we call it una noche? And I think if people hung in there for like the extra time we went over last month in the video lecture that I uploaded, I actually showed a sneak peek of someone's presentation, or 2 people's presentations, I think. So yeah, you'll get to see them in full coming soon. Yeah, I got a really great one last month. I think hers is going to replace one of the ones I typically send out. Although I'd like to find more examples of kind of in between. Like I mean, I have one. I mentioned the old school PowerPoint presentation where it was still following course concepts, visually driven presentation, professionally scripted voiceover. So she did just fine. But yeah, I'd like to find more examples kind of in that vein as well, so people don't just see the amazing ones and think, oh my gosh, how am I going to do that? No Fs unless it's, oh, you mean the presentations don't show any F present? I never show the presentations that aren't in good shape. So, and it's also kind of difficult to eliminate student information in the presentations. So that's another thing too. Oh, I should stop the recording. People are watching the recording. I apologize. You've been hanging out here for 15 minutes, but I think most of the information has been useful, the question and answers. But I'm going to stop the recording now.